A very good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night, everyone. If we're joining from different parts of the world, and I wish to have the singular honor to welcome you to this first leadership talk by colleagues from the Civic Advisory Hub this year. And it's coming at a timely time for women, particularly because we are in celebrating the Women's Month alongside the Commission on the Status of Women. So I think today's topic, which is looking at this decontrasting the ecosystem of terrorist propaganda, could not have come at a better time than now, when we understand what is happening really in different parts of the world at the global scene. We're having insurgencies, unrest, war in many parts of the world. And I think war in one place usually has a ripple effect to affect all of us. My name is Leah Mitava from Zambia, and from an organization called the Zambia Council for Social Development. It is an honor for me to moderate this session, like I said earlier on, which is under the Leaders Talk Africa, and I think on the timely and critical topic that I already spoke to. It is important to note from the outset, colleagues, that extremist propaganda today is no longer peripheral. It is central to how extremist movements recruit, radicalize, as well as sustain themselves. It's about, where the money is, then terrorists are able to be owed. It is sophisticated, it is adaptive, fluid, and I think has a way of embedding itself in our everyday life. And it is deeply also embedded in the digital space. And we know that our younger population, particularly if you look at Africa, which has bottom heavy population pyramids, popular culture, and even everyday narratives. But what is also important to note for this particular session is that it is not gender neutral. Women and men are targeted differently as victims, as mobilizers, as messengers, and at times, yes, as actors within these ecosystems. Understanding these dynamics, therefore, is not optional, but rather it is essential if we're going to deal with the whole issue around deconstructing and disrupting the system. And I would like to invite us to look at three issues, which is we need to understand how propaganda works, how it resonates, how does it communicate with the young people, how does it resonate with the women, with the men, with the people in rural areas, with the people in urban areas, and finally, but not least, how do we counter it through strategic, inclusive, and context-sensitive communication, because terrorists speak our language. And as we listen to the two ladies that we have today, and these are from Kenya and Cameroon, Dr. Sally and Dr. Martha, I would like to encourage all of us to not only participate as observers, but we need to understand that we're actors in our own rights, each with a role in disrupting harmful narratives. I really do look forward to an enriching conversation with us. And I would like to invite, let me just go back to the program. I'd like to invite our first facilitators for this morning, which is colleagues from Civic Advisory Hub, to try and help us check the connection, the sound, the background, and the lighting, if it's okay for all of us. And then we proceed to the next agenda item, which is opening remarks from Civic Advisory Hub. So, Julie?
Thank you so much, Leah. Thank you for the very brief, very detailed introduction. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're joining us from. and welcome to the first 2026 edition of the Leaders Talk Africa webinar series. My name is Julie Butinde. I lead communications at the Civic Advisory Hub. My job is very simple. To those who have joined us before, I welcome you back. But if you're joining us for the first time, engaging with us for the first time on this platform, allow me to briefly share what the Leaders Talk is about. The Leaders Talk Africa is a platform for diplomacy-driven dialogue on cross-cutting issues that are topical, ranging from ML CFT frameworks, social justice, accountability, so many more. While our core focus for the platform is to amplify CSO voices and perspectives on these different issues, we value our collaborations, so we work closely across sectors with government, civil society, the private sector, for a 360 approach to achieving meaningful, lasting solutions. Today's topic, deconstructing terrorist propaganda, is one that is equally topical, like Leah explained, and quite dynamic. So she gave us a very good breakdown, which I will not repeat because it was very detailed. What I can add is that, like she said, what is very concerning right now is the way this messaging is very targeted. It is not gender neutral. These messages are very much like your For You page or your social media timeline, or even those ads that pop up on YouTube, let's say, that seem to know what you have been thinking about or intending to buy recently. They will usually speak to you as they are targeted using gender demographics, using age demographics. Like she mentioned, the youth are the people that are mostly online. So that is one thing of concern that we need to worry about. So I would say our goal today is, first of all, to better understand. You may not know, while you might not be a supporter of these organizations, you might have unintentionally amplified their message without knowing, maybe sharing a video or engaging with some of this content that may on the surface seem engaging and just, someone that resonates with your views, but then there might be some harmful, undertones and undercurrents. So I'd say our goal today is to better understand how to identify this extremist propaganda, this messaging, but more importantly, how we can counter it through strategic, informed communication. So with that, I'll say I encourage everyone to please use the chat, wherever you're joining us, to share where you're joining us from, and also any experience, any reflections you might have on this topic. And also use the Q&A button and submit your questions throughout the session. We'll try to respond to them as much as we can. With that, I'll hand it back to Leah to guide us through the conversation. Welcome once again, and thank you.
Thank you so much, Julie, for our welcoming remarks, which I think are really good. And I think I also hear you when you say that seemingly some messages that we receive might be just coming from from nowhere, but yet behind them, they're actually strategically crafted and targeted. It is now my honor and pleasure to invite our first speaker, Dr. Martha Anjiri. And Dr. Martha is the head of strategic communications at IGAD, which is the Center for Excellence for Preventing and Countering Violence Extremism. With over 15 years' experience, she leads regional efforts across the Horn of Africa to counter extremist narratives and strengthen social cohesion through strategic communication and dialogue. IGAD, I think, is a membership, an intergovernmental body of about 7 or 6. I think she'll speak to that. Dr. Martha, you have 20 minutes. I know you have a presentation, but I'm going to be tight on time so that we also don't lose our audience. So I will invite you to make the presentation in the next 20 minutes before we invite our next speaker. I would like as much as possible to have this as a two-way conversation where we allow participants to also join in. So Dr. Martha, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Leah, for that excellent introduction. I don't know if Julie, I can be helped with the presentation. But in the meantime, I can maybe just highlight and say that when we speak of terrorist propaganda, we are not just talking about information. It's about influence, and we are called, to shape emotions, identity, and ultimately our behavior. And I'm more than delighted to talk about this topic, which is close to my heart. And as Leah has indicated, in my work, we do a lot of support of both state and non-state actors on how to deconstruct terrorist propaganda. And with that also is how do we then amplify our own messages? I like how Leah started and said that we are actors. All of us are actors in our own rights. And therefore, it's very important that we take this subject at heart. As we have just said, it is timely. And we also need to see how can we contribute in our own light. So I'll briefly walk us through how terrorist propaganda operates, who it targets, and how it spreads, and what we can do as the different actors to prevent it. And I'll be drawing from the work that we have been doing at the IGAD Center of Excellence for Preventing and Countering Violent Extremism. So the session objective, as you can see highlighted, is I'll be focusing on the strategic communication, how we can be able to utilize these the strategic comms to counter terrorist propaganda. So on the first slide, I talk of terrorist propaganda. In the very sense, if you're to think of propaganda and how we know it, it is communication that influences. It's a communication, that is very purposeful. And therefore, when we coin the word terrorist propaganda, we are saying it's the strategic use of communication, to influence perceptions, and what we term this as radicalization, to legitimize violence and this terrorist narrative, and to mobilize support, recruitment, and action, which comes as terrorist acts. Now, who are the targets? In the next slide, who are these targets? And we have talked that both men and women are affected and are targeted. And we can look at first the individuals experiencing grievance or marginalization. Most of the propaganda that you're going to see online is, or rather, it is very specific, and it is looking at people who have lived through realities such as injustices, the human rights are abused, or they feel that they are marginalized, and so on. So you are going to find what we call, we talk of the terms push and pull factors. And these are the things that actually motivate people. And these what we are calling the grievances that push people into these groups. And the terrorists take advantage of these and craft their messaging, targeting this kind of people. The youth, the young men and women, when we look at youth, then we're looking at people who may be between 18 and 35, different member states categorizing them very differently. Then they are seeking identity. They want to feel that they belong. And I talk of digitally connected audiences. And when we talk of these are people, any person who is actually connected to the social media platforms is also a target. And communities exposed to conflict narratives. And this is going to mean if you're in communities in epicenters such as Somalia, we are seeing now the border or the northern Uganda, the eastern DRC, is that you're going to have these direct messages, from armed groups. And the propaganda that you're going to find is framed as protection, as resistance. And of course, you're going to find that these narratives are like, the state has abandoned you when you're looking at people who have been marginalized and so on. And what makes the targets vulnerable as I end is that it is not just the exposure and the response to it, is the emotional resonance, which is what I'll be is going to be the foundation of this presentation as I do it. So emotions are the entry point and the ideology comes later. Now, the next slide, please. When we look, how does the terrorist propaganda work, or what is the psychological pathway? And which I've already said that the process is very deliberate and it is designed to shape how people feel, think, act, and emotionally. Emotionally, as I've just said, this is the first entry point. So they want to trigger these feelings: anger, hate, so emotions come before everything else. And secondly, you're going to see the narrative construction. So turning these emotions now into stories, simple stories for complex problems. Thirdly, now the identity and belonging, where all of us and most of us want to feel that we are wanted. And you're going to see us and us versus them sort of narratives. So then it is the identity that makes these messages stick. We have the moral justification. Now, this is to normalize violence so that violence now becomes acceptable. And of course, the dissemination ecosystem, which we are seeing in our social media platforms, both encrypted and decrypted social platforms is what. So the bottom line is it doesn't happen by accident, the terrorist propaganda. It is planned, it is very intentional, it is very strategic, and it looks at emotions. And we are saying that strategic communications are very critical to disrupt this cycle by addressing these emotions, exposing the contradictions that come, you're going to see later, and strengthening the positive identities before these narratives take hold. In the next slide, I have an operational, they are the core emotional hooks. This is just, again, an emphasis. So the anger, we have just talked about it, the fear, the belonging you want to have, the hope, the shame. This just buttresses. These emotions are the entry point and the ideology comes later. So if you're to look at the ecosystem slide, the next slide, please. So the terrorist propaganda operates in a very very layered digital ecosystem. The diagram you see there is my own. That's why I call it an operational structure. We can always revise it, but we start at the very core, the encrypted messaging. We have Signal, we have things like WhatsApp, the Element, Matrix, and this is where they now first release these messages. We have now the second core, after the core control, we have what we call the narrative and legitimization. So you're now framing this propaganda as news. If you have followed the Al-Shabaab through their Al-Kataib arm, there is like a platform called the Shahada News. You're going to see like Chipwire, Rocket Chat. Now here you're framing these as news. And it's very, looking at the different sort of triggers that we have just talked about. Thirdly, at the third layer now is amplification, and this is where we have a lot of peer-to-peer sharing. So the reach and visibility, it goes far and wide. And here we are looking at platforms such as Facebook. You are looking at things like TikTok, YouTube. And of course, there is a lot. The message is the visibility is really, really amplified at this point. Lastly, the terrorists and the violent extremists, they know that this message, at some point, the government arms are going to put it down. If you read the news, you're going to see a number of websites, social media sites. So how do they ensure that they survive after disruption? So we have what we call the backup channels, and you're going to have, this is the dark web. So this is where they now ensure that this information goes back into the same cycle. So the terrorist propaganda is not linear at all. And if you're to look at it and see the different kind of platforms, then you can be able to understand that it is very, the content is put there to circulate and then regenerate, and they know how to adapt, and that different platforms always have very different functions. We can quickly go to the next slide. Why does this propaganda spread? I started by saying that it exploits real grievances. These are things that people may see, they are not real issues, but to the people who are affected and who are living it, they identify, and they are likely to identify. We call them the vulnerable population. they're likely to identify with the propaganda that is being disseminated. It is very emotionally shareable. Is that people don't share propaganda. It is not because it is true, but it feels true and it touched to their core of emotions. And something about designing these messages is that they are very simple, they are relatable messages. So, and you're going to see this, one key principle of effective communication is simplicity. The simplicity makes the message spread very fast. Then it blends into everyday online spaces, and I liked Julie mentioned unintentional propagation of this data. So you are going to see a video, you click and you send, and you're going to find it in sections labeled as just very normal content. You are going, even in humanitarian content, we have flagged some of these messages. Again, it gains a lot of power through the peer sharing, because you're going to trust a friend or family member or a community leader or a respected person who shares this kind of message. And again, it is going to adapt very quickly to context and pressure. And by this, I mean, like now we have been able to see local languages are being used by the terrorists to make sure that they touch to the heart of the people that they are targeting. So you're going to find we are now having messages in Amharic, in Kiswahili, we are having in French, even Oromo. Our local languages are also being used by these terrorists to advance this propaganda. In the next slide, I talk of the online platforms accelerate this process significantly. So the speed, of course, prioritizes emotions over accuracy. And you know how this short form and visual content, it spreads very fast. The peer-to-peer sharing, as I've just said, builds a lot of trust and legitimacy, and algorithms reward engagement, not truth at all. And you have seen this. Again, as I've just indicated in my previous slide, is that the content circulates, adapts, and it reappears across different platforms. I'm going to show a few examples. We can move on. So I call this strategic asymmetry. I'm just giving an example there. A guy called Rashid Abdi, who I follow keenly, once said a few years ago that the Al-Shabaab, they run very sophisticated media comms operation, and the Kataib, the internet arm, and the radio underlas, they shape the local narratives and the international narrative very quickly. The press statements are well issued, and he says the governments are no match. And on the right side, I have different pictures of Al-Shabaab through the Al-Kataib app. This is when there was that attack on the Ugandan army, and you can see how quickly they were able to disseminate and have these very clear visuals. The press statement, as I'm indicating, are actually very much on point. So when we talk of this, is that they have perfected this art. On the next slide, I talk of the contradictions, and they are very important when it comes to actually constructing what we call the counter narratives. A key part of deconstructing terrorist propaganda is exposing its contradictions. So if they claim to protect communities, then we see, and we have seen it, the harm that happens to civilians and the senseless loss of lives that we see. If they claim resistance, there is a destruction of livelihoods and so on and so forth. I'm sure these slides are going to be shared with you. The next slide. So I look at the communication principles. What makes propaganda very effective is that it follows the communication principles. So you see that terrorist propaganda disseminated online, it succeeds because they apply fundamental principles that align with modern media ecosystems, including the social media platforms. So it is going to mirror key news values, and it actually also applies the 7 C's of communication, which I will quickly run through. The next slide, please. So we have the news values there, the human interest, they are going to show people are martyrs if their people have been injured. If you look at the timeliness, they are very fast, as I've just shown, the press releases. If you look at the issues of conflict, they use the us versus them narratives, the proximity and the prominence of the propaganda as it is. You can read through. I have elaborated on these news values and how they exploit them. In the next slide, I look at the issues of the principles of effective communication. We call them the 7 C's of communication. For those of you who are communication specialists, I know you can relate to these. You know, when we talk of clarity, of thought, of expression, so they make sure that the simplicity calls to attention. And, you know, the operation was successful. We were able to do this. So the clarity of thought and expression is normally very on point. The conciseness, I just talked about it. So it is brief. They have these slogans, which are very appealing. When you talk of concreteness, you know, they always look at the numbers. Of course, most of these are amplified and not true. The correctness, they want to use formal language. If you look at some of these messages that they put through, the coherence, you know, the repetition of key themes that of the governance failure, government failure. They're looking at avoiding, and they avoid contradictory messaging when they're doing this. The completeness, you know, where, what happened, who was attacked, why. This is the ideological bit of which they justify why they did whatever they did. And courtesy, you know, they make sure the aggressive language is to those they would term as their enemies, but to the people that they are targeting, of course, this is very message that is alluring to them. The next slide. So I show a bit of examples. So these are some of the online claims that you're going to see, that we are defending our community, the state has failed you, violence is the only solution, and so on and so forth. And they can be categorized under the social narratives, the political narratives, the clan and ethnic narratives, and so on. This next slide is actually a message that I picked from a WhatsApp group. And, you know, it reads, and you can see it, you belong nowhere. Join us and you will have a purpose. If this sounds interesting, reply to this text and you'll be in touch. This is an example from a WhatsApp group, and there are many other examples that you can be able to see. The next slide, please. This again was on the attack. This was DRC. This was in January. And if you read that, when they're justifying this is early democratic forces now aligned with ISIS. And you can see how quickly, the minute this attack happened, we had these messages on Instagram, we had them on X, we had them on Facebook. And you see, by the grace of God, God Almighty, blah, blah. So if you read it, you know, you're able to see how concise and how direct they are, and how they praise God because they have really done what is right, and so on and so forth. The next slide. Yeah, so I have this deconstructing the ecosystem, and then unintentional propagation is the biggest challenge we have. And the reason why, for me as a communication person, I am really keen on working with influencers in our social media spaces. So we had this unintentional propagation right here by some influencers when the attack happened for the Uganda Armed Forces. On the right, we had Daniel Lutaya, who is one of the people that we have closely worked with, especially from the media practitioner side. And he very quickly came and was able to indicate that it was not good to share this information. And so we need to have more people, more credible people coming online and being trained to enhance their capacities to be able to identify these unintentional propagation and counter these narratives. The next slide. Yeah, so it's still the same thing. We have like Haron Maruf there shared this video, which was showing a very, a good system of training the Al-Shabaab soldiers and so on. And this is an intentional propagation as well, as he's very well followed and people believe what he says. Again, on the right side is someone that we also trained called Solomon, who is also very keen to counter any messaging that is unintentionally propagated or even intentionally propagated. In the next slide, I'm coming to the end. So this is the preventive approach, and we are saying we need to communicate early to prevent narrative dominance. And unfortunately, most of our governments are not able to do the communication very fast. And as we started, Leah mentioned, and she said that we are actors in our own right. So we also need to be very keen. We also need to act where necessary and communicate early and ensure that we are giving the correct information. As I've noted in my previous slides, it is important that we identify the claims so that we are able to draft or the effective counter-narratives and address emotions, not just the ideology. And as I mentioned in the previous slides, we need to expose contradictions in the extremist narratives through lived realities and promoting credible and inclusive voices. And lastly, in my recommendation slide, I am saying that we need to institutionalize, this is for the policymakers, strategic communication as a core prevention tool. We need to strengthen trust, again, by communicating early, clearly, and consistent, especially during crises where we have these terrorist attacks happening. We need to empower credible messengers, which are the center we are doing in the online spaces, including religious leaders, youth, media practitioners, and even media influencers, and the women as well need to be equally considered as we look at gender responsive approaches. And we need to strengthen digital literacy for both our young men and women and any person using these online platforms to counter misinformation and disinformation. So as I conclude, I want to say that, and I want to reiterate that terrorist propaganda, it thrives where there is emotional vulnerability, where there is identity crisis, and where there are gaps in communication. And if we are to counter and to develop effective counter and alternative narratives, we say that we cannot afford to be purely reactive. We need to be proactive. We need to be grounded in the human connection, because this is not just a battle of messages. We are contesting over identity, over belonging. And therefore, our messaging must equally be strategic. We must be very intentional in our messaging. We must be proactive. And I'll end by saying, let us remember that if we don't fill our online and offline spaces with credible and inclusive narratives, someone else will. And the terrorists are these someone that I'm talking about. Thank you very much for this great opportunity to the Civic Advisory Hub team. I am very grateful for this opportunity, and led by Mr. Yona. Thank you for this opportunity once again.
Thank you so much. We give a hand of applause to our first speaker, Dr. Martha, who has just helped us unpack this topical issue. And I think we can also celebrate her by just sending emojis. I'm hoping that we're auto savvy, so we are able to also just show reaction. It often encourages our speakers to speak. And I think from her intervention, what stands for me, and I think stands out for me, and what it reminded me is a saying somebody gave to me to say, nature knows no spaces. Where you cut down a tree, the moment space is created, you'll see if you go back there just a few weeks later, a few months later, something else would have grown over there, whether it's wood, whether it's another tree, whether it's the same tree mushrooming in multiple areas. And I think this is a key takeaway to say that where there are gaps at the household level, we don't love the children, we don't have the time for them. In the community level, in the school setup, children are bullied. You'll find that they'll find space somewhere. And I think this is where she was talking about the emotional connection and helping us remember that human beings are social beings by nature. So we are drawn to be appreciated, and all of us like to think we're the best people. So if other people think we're bad, we're going to move towards where other people think we are good. So thank you so much. And I would like to just go into our next presentation. Please, let's just note down the questions, points for clarification, so that we have an interactive moment after the second presentation, which is coming all the way from Cameroon, from a lady called Dr. Saleh Mbomien, Women, Peace and Security Advocate and Executive Director of Common Action for Gender Development. Dr. Saleh has over 2 decades of experience. She has been at the forefront, advancing women's rights, peace building, working around social change, including leading initiatives that promote women's participation in conflict resolution and decision making. And I'm also excited to mention on her behalf and put this spotlight on her that she's also a recognized voice in regional peace efforts and actually a recipient of the German Africa Prize for a contribution to women-led peace building. So you can see that women are not only victims in this conversation around countering terrorism effort or financing, but rather they are leaders in their own right. So as we celebrate Women's Month, I'm really honored to be part of this duo that has done so much in this area. So Dr. Sally, spotlight is on you.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, the Civic Advisory Hub team, fellow participants at this webinar. I hope my voice is good enough to follow the beautiful voice of Dr. Matt after that beautiful presentation. So I want to start by just recapping what she said. She said, terrorist propagandas are pushed forth by influencers, and most often, let's say 80% of the time, is unintended because they are unsuspecting. So if we agree, according to our first presentation, that extremist propaganda deals on emotions, on identity, which builds a sense of belonging or exclusion in citizens, then it will be good for me to have this conversation take another turn to look at the gender considerations in this extremist propaganda. Because it's a game of messaging, speaking to the people and speaking to their pain, most often than not, we are carried away by the excesses of extremist propaganda, extremist groups, without understanding their strategy. All messaging from extremist groups are never neutral. Yeah, agreed. And because they are never neutral, they sit on the very foundations of our society. And most of our society are patriarchal society where there are gender differences. And because of this, these gender understandings are used differently by different terrorist groups. Now, if in propaganda, they make the messaging speaks directly to the different identities. I want to focus on the gender identities as our communities projected. They speak to men as masculinity is power, masculinity is an act of revenge, masculinity is taking responsibility and leading. They speak to women like women, you have to protect your family, you have to make sure your children contribute to community development and growth. That way it puts people on a tight corner. It also talks about family honor, how families should honor the community. And finally, it talks to girls, where it talks about girls should be virgin, purity, girls should come out for protection, marriage to generous and generous in the extremist rank to be able to get protection. Now, with all of this conversation, it gives value to often left out people because most of this extremist propaganda starts when there is a vacuum, as Martha said. So when you speak to the pain of a people, they are likely to join you. And that's what happens. When this is done, when there is a terrorist extremist propaganda, what happens is people try to respond. When they respond, because it's a game of messages. You send your message and I send my message to counter what you're saying. In the process of responding, people feel that these extremist propagandas are usually gender blind. They are not. They are not gender blind. So because of that, because this messaging are gender engineered, when communication to it ignores the problem, then the diagnosis is wrong. If you ignore the fact that it has a gender approach to it, then you've diagnosed the problem wrongly and your response can never meet that. If we agree that extremist groups do propagandas that are timely, that speaks to the needs of the people, then our responses to it also needs to be timely and also speak to the needs of the people. So when you talk about all of these things and ask men to revenge, to participate, and you do not diagnose the problem, then your response immediately leaves out an identity crisis that is a driver of this extremist propaganda. So it fails to understand the emotional triggers that comes with talking about the identities as these extremist group propagandas are always conscious of, and they also forget the pressures that comes with it. So there are two things with identity, which is the triggers. You're a man. In my community, for instance, when they talk about you are a man, it is synonymous to pick up an AK-47 and fight. So that already triggers different thoughts and also gives you a pressure to belong. I remember my nephew telling my sister that, Mama, I'm not going to be sleeping in the bush, waiting for people to come and shoot a gun on me. I am a man. I need to go out there and also take a gun to protect the family. I have stories of girls who have confessed to me that they had to join an extremist movement just to cook for an opportunity to get protection, because it is their duty as girls to protect their family. Marriage is a source of protection and income to their family. So when we respond to these things and ignore the fact that these messages do not turn a blind eye to these dynamics, we cannot respond to them properly. Now, if we look at it, these gender propagandas are effective because they sit on the existing gender divide within our communities. And because they sit on it, people are unsuspecting. They push it unknowingly, they enhance it, or they enforce it unknowingly. So you will see issues of controlling women's body in my community, for instance, or other communities that I've worked with. You see, they beat up women as spies for dating somebody carrying arms. That is not just unsuspecting. It is a way to push loyalty, but they claim that they are just cleansing the community of somebody who is a black leg. So these are gendered engineered that we usually ignore. Generally, our communities limit the voices of women in public spaces. And these extremist propagandas to do that. They try to put people in the different cages where they are supposed to belong. They speak to you, take care of your children, support your family, show them love. That is a way to distract you from reasoning what is going on. So they wrap these conversations around these normal roles that we carry out in our communities that makes people believe that it is okay for these things to be done. And before we know it, it's something that has destroyed our community. So if you don't address this gender divide in your response or your assessment of extremist propaganda, know that you are leaving the very foil that is running the engine of violence unconsciously. So you need to address these issues. When we erase women's presentation in all of this, we forget that women are influencers in their families. True to it, they are influencers in their families. They detect behaviors, like early behaviors of their children that have changed. So when these extremist propagandas come, they can easily see that these things are affecting my children differently. Most of them, they are trusted community members who communicate issues, like community leaders. So if we do not factor these people in the conversation, then we realize that we are just taking extremist propagandas to be just a game of weapons, like they are pushing these ideologies to cause violence, but we do not know that they use these ideologies to create a divide and build a mindset that you cannot take. Like you said, Dr. Matt, most of these things are put in the simplest form. Extremist propagandas are not just only on media, like mainstream media, social media, or the local traditional media that we know. They are in the community existence, like conversations within the community existence. And that which is strong is the grassroots presence of extremist propagandas, which live in our communities and in our homes. most of this propaganda speaks to the reality of the daily reality of the people. And if we do not valorize the presence of women in this discussion, or the frustrations that most of this propaganda puts on men, because the way the framing of messages come, it either tells a man that he has failed to be the head, or it shows him an opportunity to bleed out a pain that probably the current system, the governance system, or the society has put in. It takes like an opportunity to breathe out most of these things. Now, women have their fears. They are afraid of rape. They are afraid of early marriage. They are afraid of so many things. And when this messaging comes that there is solution, it is us, because usually it's the propaganda tells you that we are together, we are one people, we are leaving nobody behind. There is opportunity for everyone. Imagine this kind of messaging. It already speaks to the divides, the different barriers that people are facing to accessing resources. Now, I want us to go back to the fact that when these things are gender blind, we forgot the role of women and girls in this, that they are used to be able to push this agenda. If you come to the Boko Haram exigencies in my country and the Lake Chad Basin, you have something that they call the kamikaze. Now, these kamikaze are young women who carry bombs. So this extremist group makes them to understand that if they carry these bombs, then they are saving the community and alleviating the pain of their families. With this said, these girls believe that when they do this, they are contributing to helping their family, and their upbringing, the socialization process within these communities makes girls to understand that they are family savers. Savers in getting married to rich men who will bring cattle to elevate the family's poverty. But now, taking a bomb as a kamikaze to explode yourself at a market square is a bigger level of sacrifice, where you are going to save a generation. So you see, this extremist propaganda is placed on a gender practice that community members ascribe to in an unsuspecting manner. Now, it's the same thing when they speak to men and boys. Now, our communities have a system where pressure is on men, and most often, whether intentionally, most of our uniform officers usually have issues with young men in the community. So when these extremist propagandas come, they make these young people to see an opportunity to mash power because they are the men. So come out, get a gun, and you revenge for that person who had done something wrong to you and insulted the man in you. That's why in my communities, we had instances of so many uniform officers beheaded by young people who got arms when most of these things started, and they felt that this is a power balance. So saying that extremist propaganda lies on exclusion, people lacking a sense of belonging, we will agree and conclude that it is on the gender lines of our community. It already excludes people in different ways and puts pressure on them in different ways, which these extremist propaganda messagings come and takes good advantage of it. So will I continue to say it's a bleak situation? No. This is a call to us that in messaging, we should be on the lookout to always use gender transformative approaches to communicate it, especially when we suspect that extremist propaganda is being circulated within our communities. We should do a gender transformative approach, which is to shift power from those who have the power and balance and everybody see themselves as players, to challenge harmful norms that are already within our communities, because as I have established, these are good foundations on which extremist propagandas they align their messaging, and also to strengthen community resilience without bringing in emotional triggers and gender pressures on people. The best way to do this is in analyzing all of this, or in pushing conversations like the one we're having here now. We should always know that to diagnose the problem of every extremist propaganda, we should focus on the gender dynamics that are embedded in this extremist propaganda, because they are never gender blind. When we do this, we are going to be able to talk about how men are targeted, how women are targeted, how the youth are targeted, how persons living with disabilities are targeted. If you can answer this, then you will prepare a response to the messaging that is going to help eradicate that. We should also look at how they position men and women. How do they position them? They position men as the women as victims, the girls as the martyrs that are going to save the community, the men as the heroes that are going to save the community. If you understand this kind of messaging, then in doing programs and all of that, you are going to take that into consideration and speak to those issues. We also want to say here that if you cannot transform what you have not, you cannot transform what you have not understood. When we bring a gender-blind response in replying to extremist propaganda, what happens is we unintendedly amplify their messages, because they are messages that we transfer, and you will see it on social media like WhatsApp. It's written under copied. Copied from where? You cannot put that and say copied. You should be careful that all of these messages have these issues. You should challenge norms that foil extremist narratives, gender norms that foil extremist narratives like toxic masculinity that are in gender norms. You should challenge them. A control frame that has been put for women, either pushed forth by religious practices or cultural practices that has put women in a particular frame. I would like to comment here that if you frame women when you are responding to extremist propaganda, then realize you are taking half of the power to do prevention in the communities. You must acknowledge that women have a place in the community where they can overturn this extremist propaganda and bring counter narratives. No, not counter narratives. I don't want to use counter. It's not confrontational. Alternative narratives. Because when you counter extremist propaganda by a counter narrative, unconsciously, you are propagating what the propaganda is all about. But if you give an alternative narrative that resonates with the people that the extremist propaganda are targeting, then it gives a new thing for them to think about, and it quells the extremist propaganda. Now, we should also stigma around women's leadership or public voice should be greatly stopped, because the truth is, if we agree that in peace building, women have given communities very strong early warning systems, then allowing their voice within public spaces to be voices that will speak, it is a subtle strategy to already respond to extremist propaganda. I would want to end by saying that gender responsive and emotionally intelligent communication is the way out when we have extremist propaganda in our communities, because it will speak to emotions, not logic. It will use local languages and cultural references because it is embedded in our communities. The people will have a sense of belonging. If that is done, it will address gender-specific fears, pressures, and aspirations. Remember, emotional triggers and gender pressures are drivers of community recruitment to extremist propaganda. Then it will highlight the fact that there is dignity, justice, and strength if we want to build community resilience. I want to give an example. Rather than messaging that reject extremist ideology, say your voice protects our community's dignity and future. That makes each identity own it, claim it. Your voice protects our community dignity and future, not a man protects a woman or this tribe. So we should be careful with those messaging, and there should be some intentional work on digital literacy for young people, because there's a lot going on the media that extremist groups are taking advantage of and recruiting young people. So there should be that conversation. And finally, Leah, I see you looking at me to say, Sally,
That's the
it's time to
second.
shut up.
Finally, Sally.
And finally, I will say that a gender transformative approach remains what I will advocate for if you want to discuss extremist propaganda, because it will not simply add women, youth, and the other vulnerable groups to counter propaganda efforts. A gender transformative approach will reshape power, challenge harmful norms, and strengthen social fabrics that extremist propaganda seeks to tear apart. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sally. I'm sure the audience is clapping for you for those reflection points that are really speaking to how we can work around not countering, but providing alternative messaging to the messages that the terrorists are sending out. I think Sally brought out the issue around gender nuances, but also she was able to also touch real issues on the ground. She brought out the cultural norms that might be fertile ground for supporting terrorism activities. She also spoke about the exclusion, when people feel excluded, whether through maybe other people having and others not having, it also tends to unwittingly support or propagate terrorist messaging. And I think what she also says is that this is actually sometimes a game. Terrorists are in this game to give messaging that is intentional, well thought out. It's not by accident that we receive certain messagings at certain times. And also what she also talked about is the reality of how this messaging is not gender neutral. They know what resonates with women. They know what resonates with the young people that are not doing anything, that are out of school or don't have jobs. So I think those are the important things that came out. And I think finally, but not least, she gave also examples of what is happening on the ground. For instance, she talked about the young women that are carrying bombs. And I think in the country where I come from, Zambia, it's almost unthinkable that a group of young women can actually be targeted and recruited to do what they do. Now, before I get to the next agenda item, which is opening up the floor for questions and maybe points of clarification, I'd like to just celebrate the people that are in the room. So we have Uganda in the room, we have South Sudan in the room, we have Malawi from Southern Africa in the room. We see you. We have Zambia in the room. We have Kenya in the room. So we also have students. I've seen a student from our highest learning institution, the University of Zambia. Elvis, you're welcome. And I think we have academicians, we have development specialists, we have gender experts. So we have a room that is really reflective of what actors we need to be able to provide alternative messaging to the propaganda that is coming from the terrorist section. Finally, but not least, I see Nigeria as well in the room, and you're all welcome. I just had to celebrate you. I've seen Tanzania as well. I don't know if there's somebody I've left out. It's not intentional. It's not strategic as the messaging that comes from the terrorists. It's just that maybe I have not been able to read everything, but you're all welcome. I've seen Ghana as well in the room. So yeah, I hope that I've managed to cover everybody. So we get to our next agenda item, which is the question and answer session. And I think for this one, I'm going to work with the support of Julie in case there are questions that I could have missed and you were noting. Please, as I invite people to just raise their hands, maybe just open the mic and speak. Julie will also be checking what might be in the chat and read them out to us. I've also seen some submissions where people are just contributing to the conversation. Please, Julie, let's read out some of those contributions as well. So anybody who feels like they have a question they want to ask, clarify, please, the floor is yours. Yeah. And I also, just before the first question comes through, I just want to also mention that not only do we have civil society in the room, but we also have our state representatives. For instance, I've seen somebody from the Financial Intelligence Unit, and I think this is really great to have the state with us, because this conversation cannot happen with only in one sector in the room. And I think this is what colleagues at Civic Advisory Hub do really well. They're able to draw everybody together, the intergovernmental bodies, the state actors, civil society, private sector, the defense securities. So I think this is really great. And I think I'm looking forward to the next series that will be coming in the year. So questions? Any questions from the floor to Dr. Martha and Dr. Sally?
While we wait for questions on the floor, Leah, there were a
Yes.
few that were addressed privately by Dr. Martha. Maybe we could I could read them out, and then Dr. Martha, you could just supplement for the other people on the webinar. So Rubaire Januarius from Uganda, Bunyoro district, Kibale, Bunyoro region, asks what you present is very important, but how can our women and men be educated?
I'll also follow on with another question on gender and prevention. So the question is, from a gender perspective, how can women's roles as community influencers and caregivers be better integrated into early warning systems to prevent radicalization within the families as well as the communities? The second one is around digital platforms. Extremist groups have become very effective at using social media and entertainment style content to attract youth, young people. What innovative communication strategies can civil society use to compete with this level of digital influence? The next one and final one for this round is on values and cultural narratives. Since lasting change requires shifting underlying values, how can counter narratives be designed in ways that resonate with local cultural and religious identities while still promoting universal values such as equality and dignity? So I'd like to invite our two speakers to speak to these issues. And like I said, this room has a wealth of knowledge. We have various experts from different sectors. Where somebody feels they want to respond to one of these questions, I think you could add. So Dr. Sally and Dr. Martha, may you address those first 3 or 4 questions?
Oh, okay, so maybe I can start off. As Julie has said, I was able to answer a few that came through the chat. And also, I think the issue of women integration, I want to talk about it because it's something that we have been working at the center, and we are doing early warning interventions at a regional level, and to ensure that women's voices are actually integrated at the community level. So just last year, we had, with support of UNDP, we were able to bring forth early warning actors, both government and in the communities, so that we see how then what are the gaps and how can we work on them. And this is an ongoing conversation. I believe that we will be, with the responses that you are able to get, we will see how to integrate. So the issue of gender responsiveness is an area that we have been looking at in collaboration with other actors at a regional level, which we believe that they should be cascaded downstream to the community level. So I just wanted to highlight on the importance of training and capacity building of women, so that they are able to know how do they effectively contribute to the early warning. The second one on the digital platforms, what innovative strategies, and I should have mentioned of artificial intelligence. We are at a point where we can no longer ignore AI, and we are actually having bots now disseminating these propaganda in online spaces. So one of these key ways is, and which is currently happening, but in a very limited perspective from our member states, is how do they integrate AI? And the reason why the recommendation that I made was on actually digital literacy, which includes on how do we use these AI tools. one of the things that we have managed to do in our trainings, regional, which target a training of trainers, is how do we use tools, including such as Canva? How do we use tools using our mobile phones, using the tools that we have in hand to be able to contribute? So then this would be a conversation that I would highly recommend that we take it also in the online spaces to ensure that these trainings go above and beyond just not only at a regional level. And then I did not get the last question on resonating counter narratives, but I think maybe Sally got it and she can address, or maybe I can.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Mad. Now, all of this, our questions are interrelated in the sense that it's speaking to the functioning of our society, how we use different actors for what reason. I will make a blanket statement to say that if the strategy of extremist group are using the different structures of our community and different actors, then the alternative will be an intentional inclusion of these actors and valorize. Now, I don't think there is something new that we want to present to the public that this is what is going to happen, but it is just revalorizing what we do. How do we, as those offering alternative narrative, value the contribution of women in peace building, value the contribution of youth in peace building? Do we consider that as part of the national policy and response to act of terrorism or extremist action? That's something we should speak to, because if I want to give examples of what we can do, our culture in itself has our culture in itself has rich values that builds governance, like the culture of respect. That's something that is within all our communities. There is communal life where we live for each other and live with each other, like in terms of sharing resources and access to resources. Those are cultural values that we have. It is also dialogue. Dialogue is embedded in our cultures. It's just when we start having this divide, them and us, we do not have the opportunity to sit and talk. These are values that we already have. Most of our religion, when these extremist actions come, have a lot in it that can be used to reassure, because it's a question of fear. It's a question of a sense of exclusion, no belonging. These are things we can use to be able to correct all of this. Speaking to the media, social media platforms, I want to say that our communities have not exploited have not yet used the strength of the media. The narratives in most homes is, don't go to social media. It is perverse. It has evil there. It's going to corrupt you. There are people who even seize phones from their children or do not provide them with these gadgets because they don't want them to be exposed to content. Sorry, most of these children, they have it. So we have to be intentional on how to shape what happens in this media space. We cannot turn a blind eye as a community or a society to the fact that that media affects us as a people. We need to also have that piece. So my on the finger proposal will be, let's look at our traditional values that builds a sense of belonging in our community, that makes people to live together and have a sense of identity together, like ceremonies, festivals. It reminds people of who they are and builds their loyalty to these communities. Those are very simple things, but we always believe that to counter these narratives, we need to declare that we have a strong army that can kill 5,000 people in 5 seconds. That's not what is embedded in us as a people. We need to build a culture of care. Like, people are traumatized with a lot that is going on within our communities. We need to go back to those traditional practices. In my humble opinion, to respond to extremist propaganda is to amplify the use of our traditional values. Because if we go back to our traditional values, we are going to discover therein that it had a system that considered everybody and valued everybody. My final say on this issue will be that the emerging and changing trend of how young people view identity and their sense of belonging should not be ignored. We should stop the propaganda of youth are the leaders of tomorrow, because it is the propaganda of youth are the leader of tomorrow that serves as a big entry point for extremist propaganda to overtake the young people. So it's us to, if I'm speaking to government officials, I will say be intentional about inclusion. Because from all what we've been discussing since morning, extremist propaganda thrive when people feel excluded, when people are divided, and all of these can be taken care of through good policies of governance policies, and also a reviving and valorization of our cultural practices.
Thank you very much, Sally. Thank you very much, Martha, for those responses. And I think from the chat, I'll just read one, which sort of like also encompasses all the questions that came out. So one of the reactions is that the most effective way to combat terrorism propaganda at the grassroots level is through community-driven prevention. This includes strengthening local awareness on misinformation, promoting critical thinking, and engaging trusted leaders such as religious leaders, youth mentors, and cultural institutions to counter extremist narratives. Investing in youth empowerment, livelihoods, and inclusive civic participation reduces vulnerability to radicalization. Additionally, leveraging local media and digital platforms to share positive, factual content helps build resilience. Collaboration between government, civil society, and communities ensures early detection, trust building, and sustainable, locally rooted solutions. And I'd like to believe that all these sections of people that are mentioned in this message are in this room. Papua New Guinea, I see you in the room. Ghana, I see you in the room. And I think somebody also was asking how we can reach out to state actors to filter through this information. And like I said, even in this space, we have state actors. And thanks to Civic Advisory Hub, I think we've successfully held 2 continental conferences, one in Uganda, the Pearl of Africa, and the other one in Botswana last year, which were all successful, and I think brought together all these important sections of people. I'd like to see more community participation going forward, the grassroots that are really on the table when we meet. So I think those are some of the things that are coming out. And I think, Sally, I hear you when you talk about reconnecting us back to the people that we are. Who are we as Africans? We see that this issue about nuclear families is also contributing to disintegrating the family systems that we had that held us together. So I think all these are practical issues on what we can do. I don't know how we are doing with time, Julie. How many more minutes do we have? Do we have time for another round of questions?
Yes, Leah, we can have 10 more minutes, because I see there are still more questions coming in through the Q&A and through the chat. So we can, yes, just 10 more minutes.
Would you like to ask the next set of questions in case I'm biased?
I don't think you are, but from Malawi, we have Ioneji. She says the youth face high levels of unemployment and poverty, making them vulnerable to extremist narratives on social media that promise identity, purpose, or economic relief. And on social media, there's a lot of misinformation and propaganda spreading quickly. How can we tap into positive influences on Malawi's youth in this pursuit? Are there ways CSOs can coordinate to leverage on social media or community groups or any economic empowerment so that the youth are not lured? I think Dr. Sally touched on that. I don't know if Dr. Martha has anything to add in that area. How do we leverage the youth and their engagement on social media?
Young people, how do we reach you? How do we leverage your energy and your presence on social media? Any young person to speak to this issue? If not, Dr. Martha, how
As
do we
with,
engage with
yes.
the young people? Are you able to speak to that?
Okay, well, I can put my voice in it as we wait to see if there's any young person who is going to come in. But I said that our governments need to be intentional and they need to actively step in and see how do they work with other actors who are actually, there are people who have actually come in light of strengthening the capacities of the youth, especially in online spaces. There are online jobs that young people can be empowered to actually take over. But that would mean that they also need to have the right tools, that they need to have smartphones, they need to have laptops, they need to have accessible to internet. And therefore, that is why I say that our government would need to actively step in and be able to see and the policies, and also enable that the policies that are there are going to actually build up the youth and not make them struggle through taxation policies. That some countries who are now actively taxing the online opportunities that the young people are actually trying to leverage on. So I see this as an area that the youth can be able to tap into, already doing it. They only need to have access probably to small funding, which can be able to assist them get the right gadgets and also get a bit of the digital skills that they require to get an earning. Otherwise, this is an area that most of our governments are not fully tapping into and are busy politicking instead of seeing how they can be able to come together and help the young people in these online spaces. Thank you, Madam Leah.
Thank you very much for adequately tackling that question around young people. I see a hand from Muslims for Human Rights, Frederick Okado. Are you able to give your interjection, whether it's a question or a comment?
Yes. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, everybody from wherever you're joining me. Thank you very much for the presenters, Dr. Sally and Dr. Martha, for that very elaborate presentation. Personally, I really learned a lot on issues of women and terrorism. My question will just be direct, and I would want any of the presenters to respond to this. Are there any cases where terrorism propaganda has been misplaced or can be misplaced to influence restrictive legislation and enforcement practices? I'd just like to understand that perspective. Thank you.
So any of our speakers, are you able to speak to that question that's on the floor?
I was jumping in and out of the question. I didn't get his question clearly. Could you kindly repeat it, Leah? I'll be glad to take it.
Okay, so I'll just allow Frederick to repeat the question himself.
I'm sorry.
Yes, thank
Yeah.
you. And sorry for missing the question. Sorry, Martha. But my question was, are there any cases where terrorism propaganda has been misplaced or can be misplaced to influence restrictive legislation and enforcement practices? I hope you've gotten me clear.
Okay. If we established at the beginning of this conversation that extremist propaganda brings about fear. And when it brings about fear, it doesn't bring about fear just for a particular set of people. It brings about fear for everybody. So when that happens, it influences a lot of things. It influences, just as it radicalizes some people to pick up arms, it pushes legislation at some point in time to be too hard without real local basis. I want to give an example. When we had the 9/11 attack, though it happened in the US, most countries ran into having terrorism laws. These laws were enacted without clear-cut understanding probably of how it is specific for these communities. So it is very obvious that extremist propaganda hits everyone and everybody adjusts to it. Either you are aligning with them to carry out their activity, or you are preparing a counter narrative. That's why I said, if we practice to provide alternative narratives rather than counter narratives, then the policies that we are looking at will not just come up in that manner. Because you will not be addressing the extremist action for me, but you will be addressing root causes for possible recruitment to the extremist propaganda. That way, it is an alternative narrative that does not validate the extremist propaganda, but an alternative that gives hope to the targets. For that, I will stop there. Maybe Dr. Matt has something to add.
Yeah, I mean, Fred asked a very interesting question. Have we come across any cases where we have had the terrorist propaganda disseminated so that then it can influence the legislative or restrictive laws and legislations? I cannot point out to this whether there is intentional, because that is what you're asking, if I get you right, intentional propagation of terrorist propaganda, so that then governments can be able to have a backup that we need to have these laws which are restrictive in that sense. But that said, we do know that our different member states have come up with the laws that have really affected the actors, the other non-state actors on the ground, from either responding or countering these propaganda that may be propagated online. And it may be, I think it raises a very good maybe research point to find out, is there intentional propagation of terrorist propaganda to inform restrictive legislations? I think it is quite interesting that I may not answer. I may not have a direct answer that I have seen this intentional propagation, but of course it is something worthwhile maybe to look at the laws and how they are impeding the work of countering real terrorist propaganda. I think that is a very interesting point, Fred, and thank you for raising it. I look at it as an area that I would want to study deeply to actually understand whether we have had such incidences. Thank you very much for your question.
Thank you for the response.
Thank you very much. I'll allow the last round of questions before inviting our two speakers to close under a minute each. And I think in closing, you can address some of the key, maybe one or two issues that you feel are pertinent to countering, or to use the words of Dr. Sally, providing alternative messaging to terrorist propaganda. So the next round of questions, and I will invite Julie to help me read out from the chat. And if there's somebody who has a question, please proceed and ask that question. Just open up your mic and speak. In the meantime, Julie, do we have any question or comment from the chat that we can share?
Maybe the questions have been answered. Most of them have. I could just read a comment from Albert Tarema, Uganda. The most effective way to combat terrorism propaganda at the grassroots level is through community-driven prevention. This includes strengthening local awareness on misinformation, promoting critical thinking, and engaging trusted leaders such as religious figures, youth mentors, and cultural institutions to counter extremist narratives. I think he's reiterating Dr. Sally's point here. Investing in youth empowerment, livelihoods, and inclusive civic participation reduces vulnerability to radicalization. And also he says leveraging local media and digital platforms to share positive factual content helps build resilience. Collaboration between civil society and governments and the communities ensures early detection, trust building, and sustainable, locally rooted solutions. Thank you so much, Albert. Leah, we could proceed if there are any other participants that want to give in the final question.
Something.
Yes, to say something,
All right.
then we can.
Going once, going twice. Any final questions from the floor before I take it back to closing remarks? Seems to be no question from the floor. So I'll start with you, Dr. Sally. Under a minute, are you able to help close?
Yeah. What I would say is extremist propagandas will always exist because it comes from different interests that people have, and responding to extremist propaganda remains the collective responsibility of countries and its people. So from this conversation, I would say that the extremist propaganda ecosystem is something that you are either recruited consciously or unconsciously. So let us be conscious each time we want to push any agenda that we see, any advocacy, because most of those things are usually put and brandished as campaigns for a harmless campaign for XYZ, where when you look underneath, you will see that it is a propaganda to destabilize. I call on government officials here to take our conversation and revisit policy practice. Most of our states have provisions for these programs, but I hope that after this conversation, we will understand that it is a good alternative narrative to any possible extremist propaganda. Young people who are here should be intentional to not be vehicles of this, and gender activists or gender people who do gender work should realize that if gender considerations are not taken into, if there are no gender consideration in response in the work we do, unconsciously most time, we will be pushing extremist propaganda. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sally, for those closing remarks. Dr. Martha?
Thank you, Leah. I will say this and maybe buttress that governments play a critical role, but they cannot do it alone. And I'm therefore calling for the whole of society approach. It is very important that there should be more focus on enabling credible messengers. And by this, I mean community, religious leaders, our youth, our women, to ensure that communication is timely, is consistent, so that we are able to fight the terrorist propaganda effectively. And just maybe to buttress and say that the terrorist propaganda is not just about messaging, but also it is about meaning. And therefore, if we want to counter it effectively, we need to engage the whole of society approach, and we need to engage it at the level of emotion, of identity, and of belonging, not just on an informational basis. Thank you very much to you, Leah, to the Civic Advisory Hub team. It was a delight to take part in this webinar.
Thank you so much, Dr. Martha. And I think our next agenda item is closing remarks. And my brother Yona Wonjala has decided, I think, to let the women shine. He doesn't want to give the opening remarks. He was shied away. And so have the Chief of Programs, Madam Hilda Achiro, to give the closing remarks. I mean, remember, this is being held on the margins of the Commission on the Status of Women. So Yona will not be the one giving the closing remarks. Our sister Hilda, the floor is yours. The light is on you.
Thank you very much, Leah. Thank you so much for the awesome work that you've done in moderating this session. And thank you everyone who has joined in our TLT. This is the first that we've had this month, and it's back. It will run monthly. So thank you everyone who have joined this webinar on Deconstructing the Ecosystem of Terrorist Propaganda. It was timely, as we all agree, and an essential discussion that we all agree with on the call. Dr. Martha, thank you very much. I'll take your closing remarks that this government can't do this alone. We need the whole of society approach. And when we are looking at it, you mentioned out the three core areas that we should look at: the emotion, identity, and belonging. And I believe most of us who are doing this work, it's something that we also advocate for. And also your point that we must proactively fill the digital platforms with credible information to prevent others from occupying the space is also something that we all share. That's something that we agree with. If we leave that space, and then we'll have people coming with information that doesn't align with our agenda. Thank you very much for taking us through your detailed presentation and for having you on this call. Dr. Sally, thank you very much for being on this call. I know it's quite early where you are, and it takes determination for you and Leah to log onto this call very early in the morning. We are very happy on behalf of Civic Advisory Hub. We're happy to have you as partners because you're very loyal partners. So thank you very much for contributing your wealth of knowledge regarding gender and the ecosystem of terrorist propaganda. You really brought in the different examples and how we cannot contribute towards this when there's gender exclusion. Your emphasis is on the importance of being intentional with the inclusion of gender and marginalized communities, which is very key in this session, but also very key for the Women Month. And for Leah, also, you've woken up very early. Thank you once again for allowing to moderate this session for us. And you did it very well. And on the start, you clearly brought out that this is our own right. All of us are actors in this. So you gave the direction of the discussion. Thank you very much. And having women only champion this discussion on this month, it's very, very important. And advocating for inclusion during the Women's Month, History Month, aligns perfectly with this year's theme, which is Give to Gain. So we must put women in so many of these places. We must put them on the front line. And we are the women. We are the champions of this. And of course, fellow men on call, don't feel bad because we work together with this. Thank you very much, Civic Advisory team, for putting this together. And thank you finally to all the participants, the representatives of the government. We had people from the Financial Intelligence Authority. We had some from the regulators of the NGO sector and also academia. We thank you very much for attending and participating richly in this conversation. So what we are going to do, we are going to share the slides from Dr. Martha, but we're also going to record this session and we'll share the link on our social media websites. We'll share the link in our newsletter that comes in end of the month, the Civic Campus, and we'll also share it on our YouTube channel. So for those of us who are not able to follow the conversation for this time, people kept jumping in and out, please go onto our YouTube channel and watch. And then for those of us who have colleagues who missed out, please share with them the links. When we share the link on the YouTube, please share with them the link so that they can follow the conversation and they can participate. It may not be live, but then they get to benefit because it was a very rich conversation that you don't want anyone to miss out. Thank you very much and have a good afternoon from Uganda.
Thank you, Hilda. Thank you, Hilda, for those remarks that acknowledge the unique role that we have played into this conversation. Thank you so much to the incredible panelists for sharing their perspectives and to everyone who joined us. The conversation doesn't end here. As we all heard, we are actors, so let's take the dialogue forward. It's a series, so we're going to have more engaging topics, and I think Civic Advisory Hub would also be happy to hear from you in case there are some topics of what you want the series to cover. Please feel free to reach out to Yona Hilda, Julie, and the rest of the Civic Advisory Hub team to suggest those topics. Have a wonderful day, evening, and night. Bye-bye.